So, Queer Tango and Tourism. I deliberately chose a cheesy, cliche image to start with, because I think probably when thinking about tango, that's where we tend to start. Invariably, the imagery that comes up if you Google it, usually involves a man, generally in black, and a woman, generally in red, with the man sort of over her, and this woman bent into some uncomfortable and impossible position. I will explain why that is the most common image and how far it is from the things that I'm thinking about. We're going to be thinking about queer tango. This is me dancing with Tony in a bar called Los Laureles in Buenos Aires, spring last year, and having a good time. So queer tango could look like that, queer tango could look like this. Queer tango could also be a woman leading a man. One of the fundamental things about it is that it runs counter to the standard expectations of how tango is danced. And we'll have a think about that in the next few minutes. So queer tango and tourism. It occurred to me that actually to understand queer tango and tourism, we probably ought to know a little about tango and tourism, because in a sense, queer tango and tourism is a little subgroup of that, not so little, as we'll see shortly. And then in order to explain the tourism bit of tango, in other words, why do people go places because of tango? We ought really to think a bit about tango on its own to start with, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to give you a thumbnail history of tango, because when my students sometimes say, I'm just going to start with a brief history, and my heart sinks, because generally speaking they think, ooh, X thousand words, what can I put in to make it long enough? I know, I'll do a history of whatever it is they're thinking of. And that's dangerous, because what we actually need here is the history that we need to understand what follows. So I'm leaving lots out, but this is the very short version. Tango is not like other couple dances. It has a particular history. It started in and around Argentina and Uruguay, just there. Montevideo, Buenos Aires, the River Plate in between, a very particular location. And at the time that it emerged, we're looking at the late 19th, early 20th century, it's an incredibly busy place. Don't try and take this chart in, it's done by somebody, not me, to try and track all the different influences around the world that have fed into tango. And there's a huge West African side to it, which comes in through slavery, through Cuba, which, because tango looks a bit white these days, we tend to forget, but that's quite important. There's a Spanish side, an Andalusian side, French. It goes an awful long way back. We're not going to do any of that. I've just shown you that so that you can see how complex it is to get the thing that we're perhaps more familiar with. Argentina and Uruguay, and I'm going to stick with Argentina for the moment. At the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, was a country substantially made up of immigrants coming from Europe, particularly from Italy, but also Germany, Spain, some from Britain. And the railways actually strapped the country together, and they were built by the British. There's an ambivalent feeling in Argentina towards the British, who are sometimes seen as the old colonial power, because they built the railways, they built the telephone system, a lot of the infrastructure of the country was exploited by British entrepreneurs. That doesn't look like a capital city, that's 1865. And that is Buenos Aires in 1865. And as you can see, it has something of a sort of Wild West feel to it. Buenos Aires is a name that has to have come up by some sort of, whatever the alternative to an estate agent might be. It means good air, because the city is built on marshland, where the air wasn't particularly good. But still, Buenos Aires, there it is before it gets built, and there it is 30 years later after it gets built. This incredible elegant European city, we're in South America, but it's a very European city in feel, is conjured up out of the marshes with a colossal amount of money. It's important to understand how very, very rich Argentina as a country and some individuals were during this period. So from nothing, we get somewhere that's looking a bit like London, like some parts of Paris, just like that, which is incredible. Now, I'm going to tell you a story. Like all stories, it embodies truths, but it may not be completely true. It certainly leaves a lot out. So here we go. Here are immigrants. This is a typical picture of immigrants. And if you look really closely at this photograph, I've not chosen it particularly. There are lots of photographs like this. And what I want you to notice is the women. Look carefully. Yeah, it's woman, actually. She's there. And because she's a rarity in this group, they've put her right in the middle so that she can assume importance. It's not accidental. This society that we're looking at was a population where men outnumbered women by 7 to 1, which is, you know, not what we're familiar with. We're sort of used to fairly equal numbers, relatively equal numbers. And of that 7 to 1, we have to remember that not all of those women were respectable. So if you think about it in terms of marriageable women, the government opened government-sanctioned brothels in order to try and keep the society stable, so that men had access to heterosexual sex. Part of it was an anxiety that if they didn't have this access, something else might happen. But there were government-sanctioned brothels. It was part of a policy to try and keep the country stable. And from the men's point of view, not to put too fine a point on it, they probably didn't want to spend their entire lives paying for it or relying on charm, so marriage was a very attractive option, but they were competing for the hand of a respectable woman, and the competition was very intense. If you think about it from the woman's point of view, conventionally in European societies, women got status from the men to whom they were attached. So if they had any property at all, initially they lived with their father, and that's where they got status from. And then they got married and they got status from their husbands. In this society, the pressure on them to marry is taken off quite a lot. So whereas perhaps their equivalents in Europe, a jerk turns up, says, marry me, has property, often there's not much opportunity to get married, so the woman's inclined to say, okay then. In Pride and Prejudice, there's the classic example, and I'll forget her name now, of the respectable woman who marries the dull clergyman, because it's the only option she has. These women don't have to do that. They can choose. So, Argentina is rich, but there are plenty of very, very poor people. Criminal classes, all sorts, in conditions not unlike this, which you could also find in other parts of Europe. Classically, in Buenos Aires, you have these buildings called conventillos. It comes from convent. It's like a little convent, a courtyard building. And that's where some of this dance originates. I can't do the complete thing because we don't have time, but it starts amongst people who have no social status. No social status. They are living pretty much on the edges of society, and they dance when they can. There are people who are incredibly rich. I mean, just astonishingly rich, because there was a lot of money to be made in Argentina, principally from mineral wealth, but also a lot of it from agriculture, from beef particularly, which became much more practical as a way of earning money once refrigerated ships emerged. So there are people there who are very, very rich. And there was an expression, I can't do the French version of it, I'll do the English version of it, as rich as an Argentinian. People understood that it was possible in Argentina to make money, and that was the pull for the immigrants. I will go, Maria. I will leave you, Maria, now. I will go to Argentina. I will get rich, and I'll come back and I'll marry you. We'll just keep that model in mind for a moment. So, last time I was in Buenos Aires, I went and had a look at one of the wealthy mansions that was built for one of these rich families, and do you know, they had a little mock-up there of a fireplace. They wanted a fireplace. What do you do when you want a fireplace? Oh yeah, you get in touch with Edgar Degas, the most famous sculptor in Europe, and you say, we will pay you to design a fireplace for us. Edgar Degas thinks, yeah, good idea, here's a maquette, pay me and I'll do it. The First World War broke out, and in the end they bought one from a catalogue. But what kind of money is that? That's colossal. So, tango's happening in the brothels with poor people. Poor people and rich people can meet in brothels. Sometimes the rich kids are hanging out with the poor kids because there's a bit of sort of, I don't know, avenue cred, that. And they learn a bit of tango. Tango, you know, it's not settled yet what tango is, but they can do some. And then they're sent by their families on European tours where they go, obviously, to learn about culture and sex. And they go to fashionable places like Paris, and they impress the women with this wonderfully exotic dance that they can do. And the women quite like it. And the bizarre thing that happens is that this dance, which before the rich had completely looked down on, indeed they'd seen it as a threat to development in Argentina because it was so coarse, starts to become fashionable. It's often said in Argentina, I don't know if you came across this, that the Argentinians hate aspects of themselves until it goes away, and then the rest of the world says, wow, that's amazing. And then suddenly Argentina says, ah yes, that's us, yes. And that's what happened with the tango. So by about, I think this is about 1913, absolutely the height of tango mania in Paris and in Argentina amongst wealthier people. So, they're doing it. What happens in this weird, imbalanced society that informs how the dance is still danced today? Well, women could practice at home. That was fine. Around about the same time, postcards like this, you'll all be familiar with the notion that quite often images that are suggested are lesbian are in fact men putting women together so they can have a stare at them. And a lot of the postcards like this actually fall into that category. But for the moment, it's the men that are interesting. This is a couple in 1903. 1903, dancing together. Very famous dancer, Robert Navarro, I think his name, and if I've got it wrong, I apologise to tango academics. There are many, many images that show men either dancing together or posing together as if they are dancing. Now, it's very difficult for us at this distance to know what it is that we're looking at. I am not standing here and saying, there you are, you see, they were all gay. Well, they weren't. Transparently, they probably weren't. There may have been the usual quotient, but this is men who seem comfortable with one another, posing in front of a camera in a dance hold, with some of them adopting what we might look at and think of as the woman's role, but where maybe where they're doing it, it's not a woman's role, it's just the follower. It's what we don't know. At this distance, it's difficult to judge. I'm involved at the moment in setting up the Queer Tango Image Archive, which is an archive of historical imagery for people to start the debate about what is going on here, and also to look at how this imagery gets used today. So there we have some soldiers in 1932, either dancing together. There's the bandoneon, the thing that the musical instrument you associate with the tango. So probably they have been dancing, and again, they've posed for the camera. They're all facing the camera, and they all look jolly cheerful. They don't look uncomfortable, particularly, which is curious. Now, and there's a football team, almost certainly a football team. because there's 5 couples and somebody with the camera. That's 11. That's a football team. So this is the thing that seems to have happened. Christine Denniston went and danced in Argentina in the late 80s, early 90s, and she spoke to people who had known tango 40, 50 years before. And the consistent story that she got, I can't tell you if they were telling the absolute truth or not, but this is what she relates. They said that if when you were growing up in Buenos Aires in the 1930s, 40s, say, and you wanted to learn tango, and you would want to learn tango because in this imbalanced society, one of the ways that you could impress a woman was by how you danced. And when I say how you danced, I do not mean athleticism. I do not mean, you know, showing off. The woman is considering, this is not a prelude to performance, this is a social dance. It's between 2 people. And essentially the woman is, if you like, testing. So she might look and see what the man's dancing like, and eventually she might agree to dance with him. The man has to be an accomplished dancer who can take care of somebody, who can actually dance well, notice who he's dancing with, be alert, not a jerk. How can you get to be a dancer like that if you don't have access to women? You practice. So a young man, say, I don't know, 18, 19, there were these practicas. They're just places where people practice. No formal classes, no teachers. Places where people practice that were entirely men, only men. And the young man would have a sponsor, maybe an uncle or somebody, who would take them, and they'd take them to the practica, and maybe for 3 months they would only follow. Only follow. So they get to know in their bodies what it feels like to be led. And indeed, what it feels like to be led well, what it feels like to be led badly. And then they get a chance to practice their leading skills. The whole process, eventually the sponsor might say, okay, you're ready to be shown to the world. We'll go to a milonga, is like a tango ball. I'll ask my married friend if she will dance with you so that the women can see that you can dance now. So in that way, eventually the man would come onto the scene, would be seen, stands a chance of having some sort of social interaction. I said that was a myth. I think there are truths in it because it gets repeated so often. But the jury is out about the extent to which all of that might be true. People in tango, dangerously in my view, speak about the golden age. This is what they mean. What they mean is that from about 1935, when D'Arienzo, one of the band leaders, starts recording music specifically for dancing, you get, tango is incredibly popular. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of people at a milonga at a time. There's tango on the radio. There's records of tango. And people, like, they're fastidious about, oh no, I like this, I don't like that. Don't like D'Arienzo. I like Tisali, much more sophisticated, much smoother. And it's almost impossible to imagine because it was so universal. The popular music of other countries, yeah, that's me saying that, slightly greater length, and there's the source. And this lasts for about 20 years. Some of you may recognize who that is there. We have there Juan Perón and Evita, which is a way of just making Eva smaller. Perón, who died in 1952. And then in 1955, there's a military coup in Argentina. If you can imagine, in this country, political instability, and then the Royal Air Force takes off, comes back over London, and bombs it. Okay? That's sort of the level of shock of the things that you're looking at there. It's their own army that is doing this to them. And it's the beginning of a succession of right-wing, militaristic dictatorships. We don't have time to consider them all. Needless to say, it didn't just happen by accident. The CIA were in there. They didn't like what the Perons were doing because it looked from the outside a bit sort of left-wing. They were taking care of poor people in a way that some people in America did not care for at all. So they variously supported, that's Henry Kissinger, famous American politician. And there are some of the generals who formed this, one of the governments. And part of the deal was, we don't like what you're like. We want you to change the character of your country. You must push American rock and roll. You must encourage young people to become more like Americans, and then they won't be such a threat to us. So literally, there was a cultural shift towards that American popular culture. And for a generation, the tango, with many exceptions, but was seen as the dance of the parents. It's what they did. Young people didn't want anything to do with it. Some young people did, but a lot didn't. It's starting to look old-fashioned. So Argentina has a most unhappy succession of these military dictatorships and is shored up by America. And then something happens. Things are going very badly in Argentina in terms of the economy, and the generals, unwisely as it turned out, thought, I know, we'll invade the Malvinas. That'll make us popular, and it'll distract from the fact that the economy is going pear-shaped. So they invaded the Malvinas, and what they reasoned was, the Falklands, whichever term you prefer, they reasoned that is so far away from Britain, they're never going to send anybody to do anything about it. They'll just, just let us get on with it. And in that, they had, of course, miscalculated. She didn't do it on her own, and it was a tragic episode in many ways. British soldiers were sent, and the islands were recovered. I'm not going to dwell on that. It's we'll just move swiftly on. Needless to say, that was the end of them. The Americans could not support them because they were allies with the United Kingdom. So they then had to withdraw their support. So Argentina is in colossal trouble in 1983, and they've got to recover. So, bizarrely, it leads to a renaissance in tango. Principally, this one show that actually they've been working on before the junta fell, but which then came into its own. If your country has had a very shameful, unsuccessful recent past, and if part of that recent past was to embrace a culture that actually had let you down, the Americans, what could you do? And tango was sort of there, waiting to be there as the great Argentinian thing, still, particularly because it had been looked down on under the previous regime. So this show, Tango Argentino, went on tour, opened in Broadway in 1985, had rave reviews, and that's why a lot of the time well, we'll get to that in a moment. So these are the things that conspire to make the dance come back. Argentina is economically unstable. Tango, which had been suppressed, right to become a new symbol of Argentina, the young take it up. The young take it up. And in this climate, difficult economic climate, if you could dance the Argentinian tango, you had an asset. You had something that you could use to get money. And in that climate, why wouldn't you? And if you couldn't do it for tourists coming to Buenos Aires, you might go abroad. And many young people who learnt the tango did exactly that. These shows went on tour, and they excited a lot of interest in tango. So that's why people's image of tango is show tango, because of the shows that went around. It's very different from the social dance that I showed you earlier. So much for tango. Oh, sorry, tango tourism. Here we go. I had a nice quote from him, and I was looking him up, and then I found this other fact that I thought was interesting, and that I've put in there. Hernan Lombardi, as a businessman, developed 5-star hotels for gay tourists in Buenos Aires in 2008. Just sort that away for later. We're not going there yet. So, he becomes Minister of Culture and Tourism, and says, I won't even try it, we'll have the English, here we go. Tango is the cultural, touristic product that unmistakably defines Buenos Aires in the eyes of the world. So if people know nothing else about Buenos Aires, they may make a link between Buenos Aires and tango. And he is the Minister of Culture and Tourism, and that is a terrifically valuable bit of information, valuable in all senses. So, tango-related tourist spending in Buenos Aires in 2007, that's the latest year that we have figures for. That list doesn't make sense, so I thought I'd just show it you as a graphic. $195 million just taken in ticket money for tango shows in Buenos Aires. That is a lot of money. Tango tours whilst in Buenos Aires, 52.5 million. Those are also tango tours that were sold as packages to tourists. Even just paying to go and have tango classes, either public tango classes or private classes, what a source of income, because the people who are coming are much wealthier than the people who are charging for the classes. So it works really well. £40 million a year in 2007. Tango souvenirs, I put there, art, tango tat, but you know, $35 million. And then just to pay to go to a milonga, $28.5 million. $12 million in terms of CDs. And then just, you know, I got my shoes, here's my shoes. I was hoping to dance with you today, but I haven't. And it says on it, you see, it's got the address in Buenos Aires where I bought my shoes. And I think it's very telling that the shoes that I actually have in here are not from Buenos Aires, but I still have the bag. Well, that sort of shows you the kind of, you know, this is important. That's a trivial observation. But you see, a lot of these tourists, they're going there because you go to Buenos Aires because that's authentic, that's real, and those are big inverted commas, by the way. So there we have it, and that means that in the course of a year, 2007, $693 million. Now, the crash came afterwards in 2008, may not have been such a good year, but actually tourism generally in terms of the economy of Argentina has held up. So it would not surprise me in the least if in subsequent years, figures not unlike that or even greater were at work. This is big business, and this is based on dancing. Not forgetting that quite apart from the dancing, they have to book their flights, they have to book their hotels, a nice hotel, or they might take a room through Airbnb, sorry, not a room, an apartment, because from a European perspective, the types of apartments you can get there are relatively inexpensive and relatively luxurious and centrally placed, which is great. You might go out and admire the buildings. There's fantastic buildings, they're absolutely wonderful, wonderful. I should have taken that when the sun was shining. That's a good building too. Recoleta, the amazing cemetery there, full of little architectural gems, but everybody goes there and pays homage to Evita in a sort of nauseating way that happens. And then we have a fantastic opera house. You can go on a tour of the opera house. And the opera house, built in 1910, out of the most expensive materials that money could buy. So you have a Tiffany dome, you have a staircase with Italian marble that's been imported, just incredible. European-style cafes, this is the Cafe Tortoni, where you might have cafe con leche, media lunas, humo de naranja, whatever, all of that for breakfast. So you're spending money, spending money, spending money. A nice Argentinian Malbec, yes please. You could go to a parrilla, which are these restaurants that they do meat. They do meat. You know, a bit of wimpy salad on the side, but basically it's different kinds of meat, and you get to choose it. And the meat is of very, very, very high quality. They are incredible places. Good steak, good chips. This is, it's good. But you see, so Buenos Aires has got a lot going for it. It's got a reasonable metro system. And you might go out at night, you might go out to the equivalent of Broadway in Buenos Aires, which is, what's it? It's gone. Can't think of the name of the street. it'll come back. Anyway, rather fabulous. And of course what you might do is go and see some of these tango shows. There they are. That's 195 million, remember? And you might go to the Carlos Gardel, really national hero. His figure is everywhere. He sang tango songs. We don't have time to do Carlos Gardel. He's interesting, but we'll leave the museum. Go out and go and dance. You might go to El Beso. You might go to El Niño Bien. You might go to El Arranque. This is an afternoon one. I went there, and it's very formal and traditional. And you have, the waiter shows you to where you are to sit. You don't just sit. So there are single women there and single men there, and then there are tables for couples if they've come together. And then when you want to actually engage to dance with somebody, you're not allowed to go up to them and say, would you like to dance with me? Because that's a bit intimidating, and actually it's tacky. You don't do it at these places. What you do is this. You smile, that's it, I'm coming over. Okay. It's all right. So, you know, and negotiating all of that is quite interesting. I was the youngest person there. It's only 3 years ago. La Confiteria Ideal, beautiful, beautiful venue. They let all sorts of riffraff come there. And just, you know, it's a lovely place to go. 28.5 million, remember. Now, just one final thing. We've been looking at tango tourism in Buenos Aires, into Buenos Aires, and I hope that I've shown you it's a substantial business. It's important to remember, and I'm not going to do it in any detail at all, tango, because of the manner in which it was spread around the world following 1983, is found all around the world. And as a consequence, people who want to go on tango tours may not go to Buenos Aires. They might come to London, they might go to Paris, they might go to Rome. Here we can see couples dancing the Argentinian tango on the occasion of the Pope's birthday, because he's Argentinian, and it was a way of celebrating it in St. Peter's Square. So tango tourism can happen anywhere. Here we have a tango festival at a beach resort in Mexico. So there's a lot more tango tourism going on around the world. And put together, that really does amount to quite a lot of money. And I couldn't get figures for it, but I just found this blog of somebody who was basically dancing their way around the world, and you can see on their map, they've put little things down at all the places they've danced tango. They've danced tango in some crazy places. A lot of what now follows comes from this book called Global Tangos. Notice global, notice plural, not just one tango. There's different kinds of tango happening all around the world. And it's tango that's happening in a globalized world. I'm sure you must endlessly talk about globalization because it's right, you know, in the center of your industry. So we've had a look at tango and tourism. We're now going to have a look at queer tango and tourism. And I suppose the question that we have to ask is, how and why is it any different from that model that I just showed you of tango and tourism? In what ways might it be different? Well, again, in order to understand it, we need to have a brief history. You'll be relieved to know this brief history starts in 2000 and finishes today, so it's going to be very brief. Here we go. There's a book you can find out about all these things. It's called the Queer Tango book. And in it, Birte Havermüller writes, queer tango scarcely existed before the turn of the century. That's the last century, this one. It was coined by Ute Walter, Marga Nagel and Felix Volker Feierabend for the first International Queer Tango Festival in Hamburg, Germany. In 2011, just prior to the 10th anniversary of the International Queer Tango Festival in Hamburg, Ute Walter said that the term queer tango, and this is a quote, has allowed for a new idea to be established, a freer tango, which is not obliged to represent masculine, feminine relations or predetermined gender differences, which in the mainstream are seen as a given fact, and which reduces people's possibility to communicate as they please in tango. So, essentially, it begins for political reasons, and we need to bear that in mind. Here's Mariana de Campo from Buenos Aires. Oops, hang on. who also wrote something in this book. And she said, without going any further, oh, yes, that tango is a macho dance is something that few would dispute. Think of the man, think of the woman, all of that stuff. Without going any further, it is evidenced in how the roles are designated. Man leads, woman follows. And there we have them doing that. What we question is not the existence of roles, which is the primary basis of the structure of tango, but the way they are set and defined with gender, as if one thing was strictly following another. And that's Mariano da Campo following Helen La Vikinga, who is leading her, I don't know where that is. It looks like it's in Argentina, I'm not sure. So it's trying to run counter to what have become the norms of how tango is danced. And it becomes a worldwide phenomenon. It starts in Germany and it has spread all around the world. There are queer tango organizations in many, many, many different places. I have a minor claim to fame that I went and danced in Austin, in Texas, and within 6 weeks there was a queer tango Austin, Tango Queer Austin, created, and I think I may have helped them with that. This is Natalia Mikulova, who's writing from St. Petersburg. Putin's Russia, not a nice place to be gay, not good. And she writes, due to the mainstream notion on gender order in Russia, tango remains here a symbol of love and passion between a man and a woman, and a way of realizing one's femininity or masculinity. In other words, another way of sustaining the traditional heteronormative discourse. And in her article, that's her on the right, in her article, she has this fantastic, fantastic Russian tango ad, and in it, the woman is, this is translated from the Russian, that if you learn here, you will have the ability to dance Argentinian tango and will help every woman to feel like a real woman, graceful, light, seductive, intriguing. Anyway, so, and then to counter that, of course, we have on the other side, the ability to dance Argentinian tango will help every man to feel a real man, confident, determined, persistent. Yeah. So you can see what, and these things, this is how the tango is sold, mainstream tango is sold in Russia today, which is interesting because then when queer tango comes along, it's running directly counter to that. And she says, it becomes clearer why they reject, this is men, reject the following role, because by doing this, they symbolically lose their masculinity, become more feminine and gentle, and that cannot be consistent with the ideal of the true man. But in queer tango, people do. And it's very interesting. We're not actually going to consider queer tango, but I just invite you to look at this image, which shows a woman leading a man. And why not? This is the 21st century. Those roles don't have to be the way that some people believe that they are. There's a big debate about all of that, and I wrote about it in that book, but we don't have time. So, how and why is it any different? In her book, Global Tangos, Fitch notes that in Buenos Aires, on average, the gay tourists are between 35 and 55. They spend about $250 a day, which is good. There's about 300,000 of them come to Buenos Aires each year, and that brings in an income of 600 million a year into Buenos Aires. That's a lot. And the city, and you remember that guy, we'll come back to him in a moment, the city has adopted, and indeed the state has adopted, a very liberal attitude towards gender and sexual politics. In Argentina, you can change your birth sex if you judge that you are not a man, you are a woman, and you can have it changed on your what's name certificate. There is, oh yes, including the law. They changed the law so that you could get married in Buenos Aires even if you'd only been there for a day and a half. Cracking stuff for business. Very, very good for business, because they could get people to come in, have their romantic wedding in Buenos Aires, and then go away again, having spent some money, they hope. Here he is again. I just remind you what he did and what he said. And interestingly, Fitch reckons that 20% of Buenos Aires tourists are LGBT. So 1 in 5. That's incredibly high. So the policy of making Buenos Aires a gay-friendly destination seems to have paid off in terms of the through traffic of tourists and the money that they're spending. So, yeah. In this guide in 2014, there are 192 places listed as gay-friendly. So, yes, Fitch quotes Tanya Churchman as saying, there we go, gay and lesbian tourism moves billions of dollars each year. This is around the world, okay? It is a group that travels more because the majority of them do not have any children, so they're not limited by the academic year calendar. Beyond that, they have more money for 3 reasons. They are higher educated on average. It just is, okay? Not cleverer than anybody else. They probably have more opportunity to get educated. They have not had to postpone their careers in order to have children. And they don't have to stop working if a child gets sick. So this clientele, if you like, LGBT tourist clientele, tends to be wealthy, tends to spend more money than its mainstream equivalent. And it's worth remembering that if that is so, then the model that we had, I asked how it differs. The way in which it is the same as queer tango tourism is that it is also a global phenomenon. Earlier I showed you a slide, very briefly, of a tango venue in Buenos Aires called El Beso. A very famous gay milonga happens there called La Machale. The last time that I was there, I walked into the room, I looked around the room, and I recognized probably 1/4 to 1/3 of the people there. Some of them I'd met before at other international queer tango events around the world. Some of them are my Facebook friends, but we'd never met before. And then the rest were strangers. But that's sort of the measure of the international quality of it. La Machale only happens on 1 night of the week. I went on another night of the week when it was the very formal one, and I knew nobody. It was interesting. I'm just going to show you the queer tango events I'm planning to go to this year. All right, I could have picked any number of them. This year I'm having a full-on, I want to go to more, but I've left a lot out. It's a global phenomenon. I've already been to Gothenburg, fantastic. I had a wonderful time, absolutely wonderful. I'm going to St. Petersburg. That's going to be good. I need to book my tickets soon. I may not be able to go to this, but I had planned to go to La Vie en Rose. I went last year. It's in Paris. They try and do things differently there with a sort of fashion dimension, cabaret, and they also invited me to give them a lecture last year, so I think they're marvellous. And then the biggest Queer Tango Festival is not in Buenos Aires, it's in Berlin, and that happens every year, and it's just amazing. Something happens to you when you dance tango. It's something mental. Lots of people have written about it. I know other people can access it in other ways through swimming, running, other types of physical activity, but it makes you feel different. And if you have the opportunity to dance for 3 days in a row, it makes you feel a lot different. It's a wonderful thing to do. And I'm going to Oslo this year, which I've not been to before. They have a lovely practice of taking a boat up the fjords, and there's an enthusiast for 78 RPM records who plays those, which is good. So, in conclusion, queer tango. Queer tango started as activism in 2000, and to a large extent the activism is still going on. It's not that it's gone, but it is interesting to note that what started as political activism, bits of it are morphing into tourism. This is run by Astrid Weiske. She is responsible for this enormous Queer Tango Festival in Berlin. And this is her only source of income, is teaching tango. And here she is doing a Queer Tango retreat, also in Mexico. I think Tulum is in Mexico.
It sounds like it.
It does, doesn't it? It doesn't say there, but I think that's right. So it's combining dancing with a wonderful beach, lovely hotels. I mean, this is tango tourism. There's
Mayan jungle, so yeah.
okay, good. Yeah, and it's growing. It's getting bigger, and yeah, I thought the last thing we'd do is just have a look at some dancing. This is about dancing. I'm sorry my dance partner failed to show. We had intended to show you some live, but instead we will have a look at this. Sometimes in the modern age when men dance together, particularly in the tango shows, they do it as if it's a fight, because that way there's no whiff of, oh dear, are they gay? Because that's still a bit troubling. Well, these two dancers have their own take on that, which I think is in its own way an interesting riposte. Oh, hang on a minute, do the sound. Whoa, sound. It's all right, got it. Fine. The sound's not good. Dancing is. that's it. I'll send the PowerPoint to Adrian, and it has all the sources and stuff there, and that's it. Thank you very much.
So, it was really, really fascinating. It's just perfect, exactly what we were looking for this seminar. Does anyone have any questions for Ray?
Yes, do.
No questions? I have a
Yes.
question. I'm just very in the lecture we were talking about community, that is, as community cohesion and
Yes.
all of that. And I suspect that this is especially the case in places like St. Petersburg, for example, where the LGBT community tries to find safe places and everything. But all in all, it is in Russia. So is there like a resistance to it?
Oh, absolutely. That festival that I'm going to go to, they won't be publicising where it is to be held. I will be sent the information privately, because if they publicise it, the heavies will come along and smash the place up. Now, you know, I help organise Queer Tango in London, and we do it, and in a nice way, and sometimes in a bad way. Nobody cares. It's fine. We get on with it. But this is not Putin's Russia. Putin's Russia is an ugly climate for those sorts of things to happen. And that's why the Queer Tango there has incredible power, because it really is cocking a snook at some of those values that, frankly, are corrosive and confine people in many ways.
Yeah, so it's almost like a political statement.
It's very, very much political there.
Can I ask, if you go to like these milongas in Buenos Aires,
yes,
why would they have to be a special night for Queer Tango, and not, why not just, if you want to come, just go with your boyfriend and just dance with everybody else?
You raise a very interesting point. I'll give some of the answer for Buenos Aires and then some of the answer for other places. Historically, the opposition to people choosing to dance in same-sex couples, particularly against men. Women, historically, have had an opportunity to dance with one another a little. The climate in Buenos Aires used to be very conservative about these things, and women who danced with other women were sometimes said, oh, but then, you know, she ruins herself as a follower. She can't follow anymore. It was a way of trying to control what women did. Initially, there was opposition. Initially, there were enough people who wanted the safe space to come together to meet people who wanted to dance with each other as they wanted to dance. You are right to raise the question, however, because in many parts of the world, and I think about London, if I want to go and dance with somebody, and supposing I want to go and dance with a man, I could go, there is tango, London is heaving with tango. I could go somewhere every night of the week if I didn't have a life. And by and large, I can go anywhere and I can dance with anyone. So I might meet somebody that I know by accident or by agreement, we should be there. And when I started doing that 6, 7 years ago, initially the response from the people in the room, it wasn't hostility, it was mystification. It was, wow, that's really odd. What are they doing? That's a guy. That's a guy. And you know, which was fine. And in a way, I'm afraid the friend of mine and I that we used to go out, we actually really enjoyed that. That's all gone now, pretty much. And in the interim, what's happened is, particularly at the beginning of doing that. Sorry, do we need to? Yeah. Many people at these milongas would just indicate their approval. And some actually came up to us from time to time and said, we're really glad that you're here doing this. Or they would come up to us and dance with us. Men might dance with us. Women might dance with us. Women might lead us. They might be learning to lead. So all of those things are happening. One of my favourites in London is a place called Tito's, and there are a number of women there learning to lead. And if they are, and if they would like a man to follow them, I'm very happy to be the guy that follows. So in the same way that in wider society, all those assumptions about what men and women should be like, I haven't even said the word trans yet. You know, there's a whole other stuff that's opening up there. In wider society, those things are being questioned. On the dance floor, those things are being questioned. So for the moment, the safe space is still needed in some places, in some contexts. But more generally, it's a bit like a lot of other things. LGBT life, if you like, is being lived in the mainstream. which in my view
so it also depends
is
on the country and on the cultural
absolutely.
society. So in Norway it would be okay to
Yeah.
have a normal night, but in
Yeah.
Russia probably not.
Russia probably not unless you're good at jiu-jitsu or something. I don't know.
Running away.
Yeah, exactly. Running away. That would be, yes, running away. That's the right policy. Absolutely.
Because when I lived in Argentina in 2008,
Yep.
I think, so it was quite a long time ago. I went to a dance classes because, as you said,
Yeah.
Buenos Aires is
You
tango.
do it.
So
Yeah.
when I lived in Buenos Aires, I was like, of course I'm gonna drink wine, eat beef, and
Yep.
drink tango.
Yeah.
Drink tango, dance tango. That would be the three
Yes.
things that you have to do.
Yes.
And I went to a school. It was like in an apartment that was converted to a school, like
Okay.
I think most foreigners go to.
Yes.
And I was quite surprised because there were only 2 men and I think 25 women. And
Yes.
the other man was, I think, he was like 80 maybe.
Yeah.
So of course all the women were like, yeah, we want to dance with the cute foreigner, of course.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't speak any Spanish, so I was like, okay. But that was quite interesting to see that men kind of, even though it's kind of very masculine dance,
Yes.
they still see it as, I still don't want to do it.
There has always been this issue about men dancing, you know, dad dancing, all of that sort of stuff. Is it something that men do? And if they can do it and they're good at it, does it mean they're gay? I mean, you know, I'm just laying bare the narrative that runs through people's minds. All the stuff that people see on Strictly, and you know, there's a lot of gay men there earning a living, pretending to be straight, not pretending and convincing anybody, but you know, it sort of runs on. So, I think the truth of the matter is, the tango is such. And obviously, I think this because I'm crazy. The tango is such a wonderful dance that any man who's comfortable in their own skin, if they get a taste of it, they'll want it because it's just worth having. It's just words fail. Ray Batchelor, dear diary, but it is wonderful.
And one last thought, one last question.
Yeah.
Do you think that there could be a perception from the locals that queer tango is like authentic tango but commodified,
Yes.
changed to suit
Yes.
the LGBT market?
Absolutely.
But it's not authentic. It's not ours. It's
There's a whole. Actually, you're asking. I said yes when I thought you were asking another question, and I realised you've asked this question, which is thank you for coming. Bye bye.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. There's a whole thing about the commodification of it and the sort of neo-colonial aspects to it, where people are coming and they are buying, literally buying and buying into the authentic, the sort of, or the exotic. It's more sensuous. All the people from Northern Europe who go, I can dance the tango, close brackets, and that makes me a much more sensuous and interesting human being than you are, close brackets. That goes on. There are debates about whether queer tango is authentic tango. There are debates about whether any number of different types of tango are authentic tango. They rage around the social media. For the most part, they bore me to death, I have to say. But they do get raised. One of the things that has been argued is that queer tango is somehow less erotic than mainstream tango because of this business of role play, and how some of the partners, sometimes if a lesbian is leading a gay man, she won't have any, presumably much, sort of erotic interest in the person that she's leading. Does this therefore mean that the dances, and actually the foundations for that are all shaky. We don't have time to unpack them all here. I would say that there is only, Helena Vickinger says, so she's a much bigger authority than I am, there is only one tango, actually. Despite the global tangos plural there, there's only one tango. Different people dance it differently, but there is just the one dance.
Right.
You'd have to dance it to find out. Any other questions?
Okay, one last round of applause.
Whoa! Thank you very much. Very kind.